You turn a tap, wait half a second, and drink water that has passed through pipes, filters, treatment plants, and several people whose entire job is making sure your glass does not destroy the weekend. An ancient human had a stream. Maybe the stream might have dried up since the last visit. An animal might be lying dead upstream. Another group might already control the spring. The water could look perfectly clear while carrying organisms too small for anyone to see and extremely committed to ruining the digestive system. So how did ancient humans survive without clean water? They built their lives around finding the safest water available. The location of water influenced where people camped, which routes they followed, how far they could hunt, and when they had to move. In dry environments, a reliable spring could organize an entire group's movements. Archaeologists sometimes describe hunter-gatherers tied closely to fixed water sources as tethered foragers, because the surrounding landscape could be explored only as far as the return journey allowed. This meant thirst was rarely treated as the signal to begin searching. By then, the plan had already failed. People needed to know where water should be before they reached it. That knowledge came from years of watching the landscape. A river could change course. A seasonal pool might last several weeks after rain, then vanish. A spring that looked weak in winter could become the only dependable source by late summer. The map was carried in memory. A child traveling with adults would learn where the group stopped, which route they used in the dry season, and which water holes were approached carefully. Someone who had survived several droughts carried information that younger people simply did not have. One remembered spring could be worth more than an excellent spear. A spear is useful when dinner runs away. Water does not run away. It simply disappears and lets everyone discover the problem at once. Some ancient groups may even have marked water routes in the landscape. Archaeologists studying monumental animal engravings in northern Arabia recently argued that communities living there around 12,000 years ago moved between seasonal lakes and used large rock carvings near water sources and travel paths. The carvings may have worked partly as memory markers in a landscape where missing the next pool was a serious navigational error. Finding water was only the first decision. The next was whether to drink it. Ancient people could inspect a source using the same senses we have now: foul smells, dead animals, unusual color, heavy algae, or obvious waste nearby were reasonable reasons to keep walking. Flowing water may have seemed preferable to a stagnant pool, especially when the pool had become a popular meeting place for every animal in the area. These clues helped, but they could never guarantee safety. Water can look clean and still contain bacteria, viruses, or protozoa. Contaminated drinking water remains capable of spreading severe diarrheal disease, even with modern knowledge of microbes and sanitation. Ancient humans had no way to identify the microscopic cause. They only saw that people sometimes drank from a source and became ill afterward. That pattern could still become useful knowledge. A group did not need to understand Giardia to develop a strong opinion about a particular pond. Someone became sick after drinking there. The warning was passed on. Children learned the warning before they were old enough to test it themselves, which was fortunate because repeatedly testing dangerous water is a poor educational system. Experience gradually divided the landscape into sources that were trusted, sources used only during certain seasons, and sources approached when the alternative was dehydration. The last category probably involved very little enthusiasm. Mobility also protected many hunter-gatherers from some forms of contamination. Small groups could leave a campsite before waste accumulated heavily around it. They could move when a waterhole became fouled or when animal activity made a source unreliable. Permanent settlement changed the equation. Once communities began staying in one place, water had to support more people for longer periods. Human waste remained nearby. Domestic animals gathered around the same sources. Stored food attracted pests. The early village offered stability, along with a rapidly expanding list of organisms pleased with the arrangement. Research into the origins of infectious disease suggests that denser settlement, animal domestication, and altered environments created new opportunities for pathogens to spread. Although disease had affected mobile populations long before farming appeared, permanent communities needed better control over water. One solution was the well. Early Neolithic wells found in Central Europe date to the 6th millennium BCE. They were built from carefully shaped wooden timbers, sometimes using sophisticated joints that reveal far more carpentry skill than the phrase "early farmer" usually receives credit for. These structures gave communities access to groundwater without relying entirely on exposed rivers and ponds. A well changed daily life. Water could be obtained inside or beside the settlement. The source was less exposed to large animals. People no longer had to walk to a river every time someone wanted to drink, cook, or wash something. It also created a new maintenance problem. Anything that fell into the well now became everyone's business. Before wells and villages, carrying water had already opened landscapes that would otherwise have been difficult to cross. Perishable containers made from hides, wood, bark, or plant material rarely survive archaeologically, so much of that technology has disappeared. Ostrich eggshells survived better. At Deep Kloof Rock Shelter in South Africa, engraved ostrich eggshell fragments dating to roughly 60,000 years ago have been interpreted as pieces of water containers. Recent Kalahari hunter-gatherers used ostrich eggshells as flasks, and the ancient fragments show that people had developed a lightweight container technology deep in the Stone Age. An ostrich egg is already shaped like a bottle. Humans simply added an opening, emptied the original tenant, and gave the shell a second career. Carrying water changed the distance a group could travel between sources. It allowed hunters to stay away from camp longer and helped people cross dry ground where no dependable water waited along the route. Storage also created reserves. Water collected after rain could remain available after shallow pools disappeared. A small cache placed along a known route could turn a dangerous journey into a manageable one. In dry regions, containers were transportation technology on the same level as footwear or boats. They allowed the human body to travel farther than its immediate access to water normally permitted. Food helped too. Meat, fruit, roots, and other fresh foods contain water. Eating them reduces the amount that must be drunk directly, although it cannot remove the need for drinking water over long periods. Groups traveling through hot environments could also reduce water loss by moving during cooler hours and resting when the sun made physical effort expensive. The smartest response to heat was often scheduling. There is no archaeological medal for walking at noon. Fire offered another possible layer of protection. Boiling water is extremely effective because a rolling boil inactivates pathogenic bacteria, viruses, and protozoa. The difficult question is how routinely prehistoric people used it specifically to make drinking water safer. Ancient humans controlled fire long before pottery appeared, but boiling requires a container that can hold water near heat. People could heat stones in a fire and place them into vessels made from hide, wood, or other materials. Stone boiling is well documented archaeologically and ethnographically as a cooking method. That does not prove every prehistoric camp boiled its drinking water. Boiling requires fuel, time, and labor. A group beside a trusted spring may have seen no reason to heat every mouthful. Water treatment probably depended on the source, the available containers, and local custom. Once pottery became common, heating and storing water became much easier. Ceramic vessels could sit near a fire, survive repeated use, and keep a larger quantity of liquid in one place. Pottery spread among some hunter-gatherer communities as well as farmers, becoming part of a broader transformation in how people cooked and stored resources. Even then, ancient water was never consistently safe by modern standards. People suffered intestinal infections. Parasites spread through contaminated soil, food, and water. Children were especially vulnerable because dehydration from diarrhea can become dangerous quickly. Humanity did not defeat contaminated water in prehistory. It learned how to lower the risk enough for communities to survive. That distinction matters because ancient people are often imagined as possessing either mysterious natural wisdom or almost none at all. Their knowledge was practical and incomplete. They could recognize a reliable spring without understanding groundwater. They could avoid a contaminated pool without knowing what a bacterium was. They could boil water because people became sick less often afterward, even if their explanation involved spirits, purity, or simply the firm opinion of an elder who had seen this go wrong before. Useful knowledge does not wait for the correct theory. It waits for somebody to notice the result. Over generations, water knowledge became embedded in routes, campsites, stories, seasonal movements, container designs, and rules about who could use a source. A child inherited decisions made before birth. A traveler could learn a landscape from someone who had crossed it many times. A village could turn timber and soil into a dependable well. This was the same advantage humans used with food. One person's experience became everyone else's shortcut. So how did ancient humans survive without clean water? They remembered where reliable water appeared. They moved according to its seasons. They judged sources using invisible clues, carried water across dry ground, and eventually built structures that gave communities more control over supply. Sometimes they heated it, sometimes they drank it directly, sometimes they chose badly and paid for it. The important part is that water was never treated as background scenery. It shaped the route, the camp, the day's work, and the size of the community that could remain alive in one place. Today, clean water arrives through a wall. For most of human history, reaching it required a map that existed inside other people. The first water system was knowledge. The pipes came much later. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more. See you in the next one.